Welcome to The Commute, a Bible study podcast designed to turn your commute into an opportunity to grow in your faith. Whether you're sure of what you believe or you're not sure what to believe, this podcast is designed to help you better understand who Jesus is, what the Bible's all about, and how that applies to your life today. I'm your host, Pastor Matt, and I'm excited to dive into this week's episode of The Commute.
Well, hey, welcome to The Commute. I'm Pastor Matt.
And I'm Pastor Casey.
And we are in the season of Lent. And now we're coming into the last chapters of the Gospel of Luke, which is perfect timing. But given that the season of Lent is like 40 days, it's, perfect timing that could easily have happened. But I'm just glad it kind of worked out at the beginning of Lent and not toward the end. So we can kind of have some stuff for you to chew on this Lent. But, in this season of like reflecting on Lent, we were looking at some of these accounts that you're reading through in Jesus's last days as he prepares to go to the cross. Casey, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in every gospel, what you see is you see almost like a time compression. So, you've got the span of Jesus' ministry, and then all of a sudden, if you're looking at real estate chapters in the Gospels, the gospel writers all really slow down and focus in with a narrow lens on this like last week or so of Jesus, because it's so vitally important to the work that Jesus came to do and to our faith in general. And so what you're going to find is over the course of many chapters, the timeline is really slowed down, and we're no longer talking about a year or years. We're talking about like days. Is that
exactly right? I mean, this is the most significant week, as you mentioned, and you're exactly right to say that each of the gospel accounts have a lot of ink dedicated to the days that go Sunday to Sunday in what we often call now Holy Week, the final week of Lent. And what's also interesting to note is, especially in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there are the strongest parallels between all three gospel accounts. Gospel accounts, well, all of those three have significant similarities to one another, but it's when you start getting to the latter chapters of each of these gospel accounts that you see even more parallels, and not just the same kinds of content, but the same content even in the same contexts. So the flow of events mirrors each other more closely in this part of the gospel account, which I think makes a lot of sense. Like, if you're going to tell the story of Jesus, where are you really going to make sure that you've got the events hammered out in a solid sequence? It would be in Holy Week. So I think there's strong reason to believe that these chapters, or what we have in these chapters, are in essence the foundation upon which the rest of the story of Jesus is built.
Yeah, and I think too, and this is going to be a random parallel, and then we'll dig into what we said we were going to talk about. I remember going to the Holy Land recently, which, if y'all get the opportunity, it's definitely fun, definitely worthwhile to do. At moments overwhelming, at moments underwhelming, in all the right ways, I think. But what's interesting is when we're thinking about the Passion Week, and when we're thinking about the death and the resurrection of Jesus, this is not something that's Lutheran specific or even predominant in the Western Christian traditions. This is all of Christendom. And the thing that sticks out to me is, they've got two different areas they say maybe Jesus was crucified. One has this huge basilica over top, right? And, every faith tradition has a little corner and area of this basilica. And to see the mass of people that all gather around in that spot to see and to feel kind of that space and what that last week was like, and to stand near where they think the cross was, is pretty amazing. But it's a reminder to me that, this is foundational to being Christian. Like these stories and these accounts and what's happening here. And it doesn't matter what your faith tradition might be, what your worship style might be. Everybody zeroes in here because this is fundamentally important to our faith.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's got a story of some kind that, gives shape to their life. And this particular part of the story of Jesus is really the story for all of us who call ourselves followers of Jesus. Without this part of the story, you don't really have the story. Yes, it does mean that other parts of the story are important. I think of like Christmas most especially. I think the Christmas story is maybe one of the better known pieces of the Christian story, if someone does know the Christian story. But it really is Holy Week, Easter, that makes the Christian story what it is. And so I think it's just really exciting that we get the chance to talk about it.
Yeah, and so funny that you bring that example up, because my kids were actually asking me last night, and I was trying to share with my kids, which, share with a 7, 6, and 4-year-old, that Christmas wasn't that celebrated in the early church, but Easter has always been celebrated. It literally shifted the Sabbath celebration because Jesus rose on a Sunday. So the early Christian church was like, well, we should worship on the day that he rose. And so it shifted the entire Sabbath calendar over, which is pretty amazing. But yeah, it's so fundamentally important. Christmas came later as a way to kind of bookend a year-long celebration that constantly looked at Jesus's life. And so that, there was regular rhythms of celebration for the people that would kind of highlight important aspects of the faith. But, what's really interesting about this Holy Week account is it doesn't just tie together the Christian story, it ties together the entire story of Scripture, which is the Christian story. But this account here, and specifically pieces of it. So like we're going to look at the Lord's Supper in Luke 22, which is in 14 through 23. And specifically this account helps to bookend and make sense of the entire sacrificial system. So like everything you see laid out in Leviticus, some of the major events you see happening in Exodus, like Jesus makes sense of those things here in Holy Week. And a powerful picture of that, not the only picture, but a really powerful picture of that is actually the institution of the Lord's Supper. Because, for a lot of us, we kind of think as Christians, oh, okay, well, this is communion. Well, actually, there's clear indication. Luke says in 15, and he said to them, I've earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. And so what you realize is, oh, wait a second, Jesus is tapping into this long history and Jewish tradition that dates all the way back to Moses in the Exodus. And there's actually commands to do this every single year and to tell your children what this was all about.
Yeah. I think it's huge to be reminded that these events that we continue to remember and celebrate in our life together today didn't just arise from Jesus sort of like just poofing them out of the sky and now here's something new for you to have and to do. These things arise out of a pre-existing context, the context of the Passover. So it's not as if you have one particular storyline going, hard break. Now let's pick it up at a brand new starting point and take it off in a completely different trajectory. No, this is like, we're going to continue in the same storyline, but we're going to add a level of clarity and fullness to what has already existed so that it might become something even greater in Jesus.
Yeah, and I think it's really cool because if you think about it, like many of the traditions we're used to, we kind of explain them to those that are younger. And so every Passover, somebody would have been explaining what was going on. and why that was so fundamentally important to the faith. And they would have talked about the story of Exodus. They would have talked about the fact that God came to Moses, and they would have talked about the 10 plagues in Egypt and the fact that God, with a mighty hand, freed his people from Egypt. They would have talked about the reason they were eating unleavened bread is because after that last plague, the plague of the death of the firstborn, like Egypt literally spewed Israel out of their mouth. They were like, get out of here. There wasn't even time to sit and wait for bread to rise. And God knew this would be the case. So like the people took baked unleavened bread. And so, the bitter herbs like were a reminder to them of their slavery and stuff in Egypt. And so this would have been explained. Now you got a group of disciples who would have all done this every year. And they would have heard those explanations every year. And those explanations weren't like family to family and kind of changing. Those were communal, Israel as a whole nation kind of explanations. And so then imagine Jesus is stepping in and Jesus is saying, this bread, and they're maybe thinking, yeah, is the unleavened bread that reminds us how quickly we had to, he says, is my body. Oh, wait, something new's happening here. He's shaking things up in a way they probably couldn't quite wrap their mind around while they were sitting here taking this meal with Jesus. And then Jesus essentially takes it and moves it to its fulfillment. I don't even want to say moves it in a new direction, right? But he simply takes it and he fulfills what this was always about in the Passover to begin with.
Right. Yeah. Setting himself up as the unblemished lamb, as the sacrifice that will ultimately bring deliverance for the people of God from everything that had been enslaving them since the days of the Exodus. The Exodus in one way is a marvelous account of deliverance and rescue. But as you continue the story, you come to recognize that, well, God's people they still have other enemies that need to be dealt with, and remain in captivity on an even larger scale. And Jesus is setting himself up as the one who's going to free them from all that had held them in bondage. It's just really quite remarkable.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of also this reminder that, like, to better understand what's going on in the New Testament, understand the story of the Old Testament, because like there's images that we use that seem weird and maybe out of place, or we're just like, oh, okay, well, that's just what we say, like the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world, and the blood of the Lamb. And to us, those feel like very Christian images, but the reality is those came out of the Exodus. And so the lamb was sacrificed. And when they took the blood of the lamb and they put it on the doorposts, the angel of death passed over Israel and only affected the firstborn males of Egypt because they didn't have the blood of the lamb on the doorpost. Because you see, and this is kind of the crazy part about Exodus. I just read it with my kids, so I'm like really excited about it. The crazy part about Exodus is this: the angel of death, when God sent that angel out, would not distinguish between Israel and Egypt unless there was that sacrifice. And when you read through the plagues, there were certain plagues that affected the whole nation, Israel included. Then God makes distinction in the plagues to be able to say, hey, Egypt, it's clear this is affecting you and not my people. So it's clear who's at play here. But when he hits the final plague, the plague of the death, the firstborn male that dies, God demands a sacrifice to be able to pass over, because death touches everyone. And so essentially Israel watched as death literally passed over them because of the blood of the lamb. Now Jesus fast forwards it to the institution of communion, and he says, this bread is my body, this wine is my blood. He's the blood of the lamb that sits on the doorpost of our life that allows the sting of death to pass over.
I mean, you put it all into that context, and suddenly this sort of just blows up into something even bigger than it appeared on the surface. And I think, that's just a really fun experience, and I hope all of you are experiencing that with us.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I think too, and let's just get a little moment of honesty here. There are moments where I'm kind of forcing myself to read some of the stuff in the Old Testament because it can be hard to wade through at times. Like, best example, I always 110% of the time have to psych myself up to read Leviticus. In fact, truth moment, as we were reading Leviticus this time, I was reading all my New Testament stuff and I was falling totally behind in Leviticus once again. And so I sat down and just kind of did the gospelproject.com or the bibleproject.com and watched their video on Leviticus. And I was like, oh, okay. It gave me that fresh understanding and desire to read it again. But I think when we take the time to wade through some of the stuff we see in the Old Testament, then all of a sudden the New Testament takes on this whole new life, which is so powerful and so cool.
Yeah. I mean, this is not the place for it, but let this just be a comment to say that this kind of phenomenon we're talking about today with the Passover and the Lord's Supper is not the only example of this idea we're trying to talk about here. That you can scan the entirety of the Old Testament and find many, many stories, accounts, metaphors, people, places, any number of things that wind up making the New Testament come into either sharper focus, take on different layers of meaning, or really just give you some extra context for what you're reading in the New Testament. And I have a friend who teaches high school Old Testament, and her mantra is always, we need to read more Old Testament. And there are times that we sort of, shut her down and say, yeah, we know that's your thing, thank you for that encouragement, but let it be known that she is 100% right. And that is the encouragement that I'm walking away with today. And I hope it's an encouragement for all of you. Read some more Old Testament. There is a wealth of good stuff there for you.
And Pastor Casey will send her this link so she can hear on video that he admitted she was right.
That's exactly right. So if she is listening, hear it here. You're right.
And that's the last time you'll hear it. So rewind if you want to hear it again, right?
Yep.
Well, it's been a joy to hang out with you all right here on the Commute. It's always fun for us to have these conversations, and it's fun to just be a part of this Bible reading journey with you. If you ever have any questions, feel free, reach out to us. You can reach out to us through the Bethlehem Church Live mobile app. You can go on Bethlehem Church Live on YouTube. And of course, join us for in-person or live stream worship on any Sunday, 9 a.m. You can grab all that info through Bethlehem Church Live. And till next week, it was a joy hanging out with you right here on The Commute.
Thanks for checking out this episode of The Commute. For more information on The Commute or to join the Commute Bible Reading Plan, simply download the Bethlehem Church Live mobile app or go to BethlehemChurchLive/The Commute.